This week on Intrigued Full Effect.
My heart is broken because I lost my daughter. I won't be able to walk her down the aisle. I won't be able to have grandchildren through her.
I'm Chandrea Thomas, and welcome to episode 30. In this podcast, I talk about curious cases, disappearances, and other stuff. And today I'm talking about the tragic death of 27-year-old Charnice Milton from Washington, D.C. This story really hits home with me because Charnice was a fellow journalist who was used as a human shield. She got caught in the crossfire during a drive-by shooting on May 27, 2015. All of this happening while she was waiting for a bus to go home after covering a story on Capitol Hill. I spoke to her mother and her stepfather about the case, and I also reached out to the Metropolitan Police Department to find out more about leads in the investigation. This is what happened. Tell me what happened on that day back in 2015. It's been it's been past 5 years now for you both.
Charnice, who had graduated with honors from Syracuse University with a journalism degree for community news, was actually putting her degree to work. She was working for a community news organization out of Capitol Hill, and she was covering a story on Capitol Hill, and it was a little late, so she, rather than calling us, because she wanted to affirm her adulthood, she took the bus home that evening. And as she was making the transfer from one bus to the other, she sent a note to my wife, Francine. Can you?
She sent me a note saying that she was on her way home. And that was the last. She and I would text each other all the time. Whenever she was out, she always texted me, telling me where she was or which way she was coming. So I always knew whether or not she was on the bus or if she was on the subway, which way she was coming, because sometimes we could walk out and meet her at the bus stop, or sometimes we could meet her at the subway. So she always would text and let me know if she had a ride or where she was. So she did text me that night and said, I'm on my way home. So I was actually waiting for the next text, and I never got another text from her.
She received that text around about 9:15 in the evening, and at about 9:40 p.m. Eastern time on the 27th of May, she was crossing the street, getting off of one bus, heading to the final W4 bus to bring her home. And as she was walking towards the general area of a gas station where there was a little light, she was accosted by two men. One got off his bike and grabbed her as a human shield, and the other shot her point blank, attempting to shoot the other person. The gentleman who used her as a human shield dropped her to the ground, and they took off. It was about 16 of them that were actually had come to that particular area, who they were riding on ATVs and other vehicles, as far as we know in this investigation. They took off in various directions.
The Metropolitan Police Department released this surveillance video of a group of people on scooters and other motorized bikes, and there were at least 3 persons of interest in the case. As for the other 12 plus people, I'm told no one has come forward with information that can lead to an arrest. I also reached out to police for an update in the case, and investigators say there's no new information and that the case was open and active.
There was a police officer who was on duty at the Popeyes right next to the gas station who ran out and scooped her up in his arms, and he held her until her final breaths. Charnice attempted to come home on her own. She knew that I was a television host and was on the air at that time period. She didn't want to bother me, and she didn't want to bother her mom by coming out so late. And I remember telling Francine that night that the next time that she has a late interview or a late story she has to cover, we're going to make certain that she calls us early so that we can pick her up no matter what. At that point, 2 detectives out of Washington's Metropolitan Police Department knocked on our door. And we were alerted at about 11:15 that evening that Charnice had been killed. And from that point on, the investigation began in terms of her death and those individuals that were involved in her killing.
So the regular routine for you guys was to meet her at this bus stop, on a regular basis when she would be coming home, especially at night, I imagine. It sounds like
when she would call. She didn't do a lot of stories late like that. For one thing, this community meeting that she was covering wasn't one that on her schedule. Basically, I think it was like a last minute. She was called in to do that story. So usually I would know beforehand, oh, she's going to be here and she should be coming back around this time.
Yeah.
And usually there would not be a problem. And like I said, she would take the subway sometimes she would take a bus, sometimes she would get a ride. But she would always let me know where she was. And so that we would know.
And Ms. Thomas, I must say that you and I both know the broadcasting field, journalism. You got to hustle when you're young to get the news stories. And every news story is a way of getting paid and getting notoriety. And her editor at that time period had noticed her growth and potential and was ready to recommend her to the next level of writing, making recommendations possibly to the Washington Post and other Washington Examiner and other news companies. So she was hustling. She wanted to show that she was great at writing, that she was a great journalist, and nothing was going to stop her from achieving her end. The unfortunate thing is that something did happen that night that stopped her. And it was two Black men who chose their lives above hers.
And so let's get into that too, and then I'll ask you more about your daughter, as we go on. Do you guys have any idea of who was targeted? Like, what's happened? Because it's been some time has passed. You have 16 people, you said, who were point blank there. I imagine there were probably other people out in the area at the time. What's come of the investigation at this point?
Well, in fact, the mayor came over to our home about 7 days after, almost 5 to 7 days after the killing of our daughter, and stated while she was sitting in the living room holding my wife's hand and looking her directly in the eye, that she was going to do everything that she could to solve this particular murder. On the way out the door, I went upstairs and I checked the DC police information regarding her case. And they had placed her case not on an active list, but they had moved her to a cold case list. And on that night, I went on the air and I blasted her in the police department because there's no doggone way that a murder case should go cold after only 5 days. We were told that there were a multitude of leads that had come in, and we were working with Detective Chanel Howard in the police department, and she had advised us that they were going to work day and night until they could possibly solve this particular case. Unfortunately, the leads, from what we've heard, dried up, and no one could actually put a dime on who did it. Basically, that while the mayor of the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser, was sitting and holding my wife's hand and attempting to comfort her and saying that the police were going to do everything that they possibly could do to solve the murder, she was apparently unaware that the police had moved my daughter's case, Charnice Milton, from an active file to a cold case file, in which there were no leads whatsoever. And in that particular case, we protested profusely, and Charnice Milton became actually the last cold case, official cold case in that particular category in that particular time period. From that point on, they changed the rules to make certain that a case could not go cold until 4 years had passed and that every lead had dried up. Apparently, we were told during the course of the investigation that there were no more community leads. Everything had dried up, and that there was nothing that the Metropolitan Police Department could do at this time period. And they moved the case out of the hands of Detective Chanel Howard into the hands of Sergeant Andrew Finkelman. And that particular department is the major cold case area. It's filled with over 3,000 cold cases in the District of Columbia that have gone unsolved. And so when the file goes there, the likelihood of it being solved is quite slim.
Okay, so let me get this straight. They told you that the case was cold after 5 days. They told you guys that after 5 days after this happened.
Yes.
That's not even enough time to even walk around and talk to everybody.
That's correct. So we were told that the mayor and everyone else in the department were working on this particular case. And we were off record by certain investigators encouraged to keep Charnice's name in the news. And the reason was that if we didn't do that, then her case would be lost. Now, we appreciate all of the journalists in the Washington metropolitan area, Maureen Bunyan, Sam Ford, and all the others that have kept her name on their lips, Jackie Benson as well. But the truth of the matter is, without the community's leads, there is no solution for this particular case.
That leads me to my next question. I mean, the whole idea of, and that's the problem with cold cases, and especially when it comes to things that happen in our community, is that people, oh, I don't snitch, there's no snitching and all of that. I mean, is that something that you guys are seeing as a philosophy there, and that's why this is happening? I mean, if there are 16 people, aside from whoever else may have seen it and all of that, how is it possible that nobody out of 16 cracked? You know what I mean? To give up information. I mean, what do you make of that? Francine?
I have my own thoughts about that because I do work in the community. I'm a teacher. There's a thing that I call the boo law. Everyone has a boo, and everybody is somebody's boo. And because there's those connections, everybody's boo means something to somebody. And there's a fear if I say that I saw something, then, or if I say that I know of someone who may have saw something, I will be putting that person into jeopardy. And that person is my boo. And that person is so-and-so's boo. See, everyone has someone who cares about them. Even the worst of people have someone who cares about them. So they're trying to cover the butt of those who they love too. So as much as I want someone to come forward and say, I saw, or I know someone who saw something, I know the reasoning is that that person is their boo, or somebody they know boo. That person on that ATV vehicle who parks it in so-and-so's backyard, that little boy who used to hang out in the corner and play with my nephew, that little boy is somebody's boo. And if I say I know something, I could be putting that person in jeopardy. So everyone is covering to cover somebody they care about. It's a bad thing, but you understand why they do that. There are some, and I know in my heart, I know that there are some people who came to her funeral and held my hand and cried in front of me, cried more than me, because not that I knew them or they knew me, but because they knew someone who was there. And that was the only way they could feel good about themselves, is to see my face. And I knew that God showed me that. And unfortunately, everything that you see going on right now in the community, it's the same thing. And unfortunately, we don't really know how to come beyond that except through God. And that's something that we have to really pray about, because all of them are in God's hands.
Right now in the District of Columbia, there's a budget for 83 to 85 detectives, investigators who cover murder cases, open and closed. And there are 7 that are assigned specifically to cold cases. That doesn't make sense when you have over 3,000 cold cases from the 1960s on, and you're averaging 120 to 130 murders a year in the District of Columbia, and you only have a solution rate of somewhere in the area of 60 to 70% of cases. That means on the average that at least 30 to 40 families will walk through their homes every night like we do, wondering where the killers are, wondering if any justice will be done, and wondering if there's any time on the actual schedule for detectives to get back with families regarding those particular cases. It's unfortunate right now that we have so many murders that are going on. The worst part of it is that there are too many mothers like Francine Milton who stay up and walk past their daughter's room at night looking for her daughter, knowing full well when she opens that door, there's no one there, and she hasn't gotten an answer from anybody regarding the status of the case. Not just in a simple, come to one of our special events so that we can remember your baby. Come to a vigil where we can burn a candle and think about her. We're talking about who were the killers. She didn't die on some country road. She died at Good Hope, Naylor, and Alabama Avenue in Washington, D.C., 3 of the most populated areas, even for that time of the night in which she was killed. There's a Safeway across the street. There are gas stations well lit. There's a Popeyes where the police officer ran out. Who were the killers? And it's not good enough for people to say, I wish somebody would come forward. The police were asking us to meet and do press conferences with the chief of police and with Mayor Bowser, and have my wife crying and weeping and begging for people to come forward. That's not a society. That's not how this should be done. People who have done evil need to be brought to justice. And I hold accountable those people in our city, politicians as well as citizens, who won't bring the truth to light.
So with that, let me ask you this. Have you guys tried to pursue some things on your own with your own private investigator or anything like that to try to get any leads in general?
1 year after the case, believe this or not, 1 year after the case, a friend of mine, Howie Coleman, who is a great world detective down in South Carolina, contacted me and said, Ken, I have 76 former CIA, former FBI, former police, former investigators assembled, and they're ready to move, and they want to solve this case for you. And I picked up the phone and I called the chief of detectives for the Metropolitan Police Department. And the chief of detectives said, Ken, you don't really need to don't do that. We don't need that. We already got a lot of detectives working on your case. I'm not interested in people working on my case. I'm interested in people solving a crime. And if I can find the right people to make it happen, you should open your arms and say, bring them in. Help us solve this particular case.
So when you went to the police about your friend or your contacts telling you that they wanted to come in and help, the police said what to you?
They said it was unnecessary. They have all of their detectives working on the case. We'll get this case solved. You don't need any outsiders coming in taking a look at this case. Now, I thank God for Howie Coleman and the other men and women that have been assembled to work with us on that particular case, because they were ready to do something that our police department was unable to do. They were willing to voluntarily investigate the case. Now, when I say this to people, people think, well, you think you all that and you're looking down on the police. I am not. My first responsibility is to my wife and my daughter to make certain that her case is solved. So I am not trying to put down the Metropolitan Police Department. I'm not trying to put down Muriel Bowser or her staff. I'm trying to solve a case. My heart is broken because I lost my daughter. I won't be able to walk her down the aisle. I won't be able to have grandchildren through her. I won't be able to see the smile on her face when she comes home and gives me a hug and makes me a lemonade. I won't be able to see any of those things. So it's not good enough. Don't take it personal, police. Don't take it personal, mayor. It's not good enough to hear that you're trying. I want to hear that you're doing. Doing and trying are two different things.
So as far as like events and things like that, what have you guys been doing to keep her name out there? I mean, you guys passed the 5-year mark recently. So what are your plans, I guess, moving forward to try to, relieve the situation or, keep her name out there?
One of the things that my sisters do and actually is being done is my daughter loved books. She loved to read. I mean, since she was very little, she was reading before she was 3. She was able to read a newspaper. Currently, the Busboys and Poets at Anacostia has a used book area where they give away books to little kids, and where people can buy books, and the proceeds is being used to create a bookstore in Southeast Washington in her name. Also, my sisters, when there is a community event, they always put out books for free in her name. And hopefully, once things get better, we can go back to doing that. I've had people to call me recently and say, I have books if you're interested. I just need some place to put it. And like I said, we'd like to give the books to people. We want people to read. Reading was everything for Charnice.
The bookstore is organized by We Books over in Southeast Washington, D.C. WEAC Radio in Southeast Washington, D.C. And they have the bookstore placed at the Busboys and Poets on Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue there. We are hopeful that the love that she had for reading gets passed on to children, but also as a host of my own show, on every Friday night, we do open heart, closed case night. And so that is in tribute and in memory of my daughter. We bring to light cold cases and unresolved homicides and missing persons and teen suicides and child abuse cases, issues that are often overlooked in the modern media. And we try to shine a light, especially in urban neighborhoods, but not a lot of other Black families have the opportunity. And that's why we thank you for doing what you're doing, Ms. Thomas, bringing a light to the idea of individuals who have suffered and not getting the help and support that they need, rather from their community or the police departments or even the politicians that have oversight over them. Doing that on a nightly basis opens the door for people to know around the country and around the world that there are individuals who need help in solving their cases.
Do you guys have vigils for her every year?
We do not practice the vigil process. And one of the things that we have found most frustrating about the vigil process is it does a lot, of course, to help people relieve the stress and the worry and the concern that they have regarding a death. But it doesn't bring a solution to the problem. You see, while people march in the streets because a white cop shoots a Black person, no one's marching in the street for the over 300,000 families in America that have cold cases. And it's not enough to light a candle. There has to be more than lighting a candle. There has to be more than watching a balloon go up in the air with the hope and aspirations that the answers for who killed our child come down. They're great in terms of vigils, but I personally have gone out into the streets and gotten in contact with individuals trying to find out more about the case itself. It requires feet on the ground. It requires a society and a people who are not just conscious and woke about a rare event, but are conscious and woke about an event that happens every single day in urban America.
So how are you guys moving forward with everything? How are you managing, the loss of your daughter and just kind of looking at everything that's happening with society and how the case has been handled? how, as far as the lead supposedly drying up, how do you mentally deal with all of that on top of mourning,
Just praying a lot.
Yeah, I have an easier way of dealing with it than my wife. So I can always communicate to the public. I can write. I can through my journalistic blogs. I can talk about these particular issues. But my wife represents the women who, when the cameras are gone, when the TV cameras don't show up anymore, when the press aren't calling, who suffer because they have no one to express their weariness, their disappointment.
So tell me about your daughter. Tell me what she was like. I understand she's very vibrant, very upbeat, clearly very intelligent because she's a journalist. She was a journalist. So, I mean, I'm just saying.
Intelligent. Extremely intelligent. Very. She did an undergrad at Ball State in Muncie, Indiana.
Go Cardinals.
She left from Ball State. She came home for a year, and then she went to Syracuse for her graduate work. She used to volunteer at the Folklife Festival, at the Cherry Blossom Festival. She loved things like that. She belonged to a book club in Georgetown. She was that person who got up early on Saturday morning so that she could sing, go practice for the praise team, because she sung on the praise team. And she sung in the choir, and she was a part of the prayer team at church because she believed in prayer.
Tell me, what was your last encounter with her, or the last time you saw her? What happened? What was the last exchange? I'm sure you hold on to that.
The last exchange for me was that morning. I was running late. I needed to get to a work that I had to do. And she was holding a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. And she was headed towards her little room that was supposed to be my office, but she took it over. And I said, I love you.
The week before she died, almost 2 weeks before, was Mother's Day. And we were actually out of town that day and got stuck on the highway coming back on Mother's Day. So I didn't make it back to spend Mother's Day with her. But she and I was on the phone back and forth that day. So many people told me at her funeral, do you know Charnice called me on Mother's Day? People who she hadn't talked to, her godmother, all of her aunts, cousins. Everyone said that day when Charnice couldn't be with me that day, I was stuck on the highway. Charnice called everyone that day and wished them a happy Mother's Day. And everybody was surprised by it. But she, that day, called everybody. That's the Saturday before she passed. She spent with her aunt and her cousin shopping for dining room table. Charnice was about family, and she wanted a big dining room table for us. So she was looking around with her aunt and her cousin about that. And she also went to her brother's birthday, I think the weekend before too. The day that she passed, I go to work every morning. I leave the house by like 5:15, so I don't see her in the morning. And when I got home, she wasn't there. So the only way I communicated with her was through those texts. So I looked for those texts from her when I got home to know where she was and what time she was going to get home. The day before, she did what she always did. When I came home in the evening, if she was home, she would always say, "Mom, you want a cup of tea?" And that was her thing for me, that she would always make me a cup of sleepy time or calamine tea. And she just had a way of making it very special.
When it comes to my final thoughts about this case, the first thing I think about is how Charnice was a victim of being at the wrong place at the wrong time, and how she was starting to bloom in her news career and then to tragically become news herself. And then I think about how horrible it was for someone to just grab her and use her as a human shield. I mean, that's just insane to me. And on top of that, police released surveillance video of multiple people on bikes who haven't been publicly identified and yet may know exactly what happened, and they just won't talk. The family is doing what they can to honor Charnice and her love of reading for future generations with a book program, and I think that's a beautiful thing that I hope will continue for years to come. The bottom line is, Charnice was a good person who faced a tragic and unpredictable fate on that night in 2015, and I hope that someone will at least give investigators some tips that will lead them to the killer and the person who used Charnice as a shield. If you have any information in this case, call the Metropolitan Police Department at 202-727-9099 or text 50411. You can remain anonymous. If there's a case that you want me to check out, just visit me on the Intrigued Full Effect Facebook page or via email at intriguedfulleffect@hotmail.com. Until next time, be safe and stay true. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Intrigued Full Effect, Curious Cases, Disappearances, and Other Stuff podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the host. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. The host of this podcast assumes no liability or responsibility for any activities in connection with opinions shared in the podcast. The podcast and blog associated with it shall not be used in any legal capacity or as a basis for expert testimony. Any copyright material in the podcast is approved by the owner or as part of the public domain. Music by Pond 5.